Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony, which is commemorating the centenary of the Royal Air Force, established on the 1st of April 1918. My name is Sharon Bown, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Wing Commander Tony Bull. We warmly welcome the family of Flight Sergeant Cyril Scott Thomas, whose story will be told shortly. We are honoured to acknowledge His Excellency Mr. Paul Madison, High Commissioner of Canada to Australia, Mrs. Ingrid Southworth, Deputy High Commissioner of Great Britain to Australia, Air Chief Marshal Sir Stephen Hillier, Chief of Air Staff, United Kingdom, and Lady Hillier, Major General Catherine Toohey, Head of Land Capability, Australian Army, Brigadier Andrew Harrison, Defence Advisor, British High Commission, Air Commodore Ian Moa, Defence Attaché, New Zealand High Commission, Colonel Luca Spuntoni, Defence Attaché, Italian Embassy, Colonel Sarah Russ, representing Senior Defence Official and Air Attaché, United States Embassy, Captain Philippe Petitier, Defence Attaché, French Embassy, Mr. Robert Dick, National President, Returned and Services League of Australia, Mr. John King, President, ACT Branch, Returned and Services League of Australia, and Mr. Gary Oakley, National President, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Veterans and Services Association. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family, visitors, and students on behalf of the following schools: from the Australian Capital Territory, Canberra Grammar School, and from New South Wales, St Agatha's Parish Primary School, Pennant Hills. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. invite you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Boys and girls, please be seated. Those that wish to take a seat, please be seated. I would now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to deliver an address.
Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We just sang it, the first line of our national anthem. We sing it often, we hear it sung often, but far less often do we pause to reflect on what it really means. To the students of St Agatha's, if you look across the pool to these men and women that are seated, in their faces is the face of those who gave their youth for our freedoms, for your freedoms. They, like you, were once young. They gave that youth, and in thousands of cases, the lives of their friends, for our nation and our freedoms, which we enjoy and too often take for granted. He lived for us, he died for us. Carol and Thomas chose those words for the epitaph, for the headstone of the grave of her husband, Cyril Scott Thomas, whose life and sacrifice we will commemorate in a moment. She had a 3-year-old son, Robert, who is here today. He was just one of the 10,034 members of the Royal Australian Air Force who gave his life for us, our defence, our values, and our freedoms. Those names cloak us here on the Roll of Honour in the commemorative area at the Australian War Memorial. Silent witnesses to the future that they gave us and the truths by which we live. Today we are pausing here specifically to remember not only one, but all of them. To celebrate, in a sense, the formation of the Royal Australian Air Force 97 years ago, and 10 days from now, the centenary of the Royal Air Force in the presence of its chief, bound in common ideals, common values, the United Kingdom and Australia. The Royal Australian Air Force is critical to our nation's freedoms and its future. Nothing can be done without its support. The Royal Australian Navy, the Australian Army. From its early origins of 8 squadrons of the Australian Flying Corps in the First World War, 4 of them operational at the front in the Middle East, France and Belgium, the emergent Royal Australian Air Force derived its values from those young pioneers, 207 of whom have their names here on the Roll of Honour, and 100 of whom died in the service of the Royal Naval Aerial Service and Royal Flying Corps in Britain that would merge to form the Royal Air Force on the 1st of April 1918. Today, our Air Force is 18,500. It flies 260 aircraft across 15 types. It works literally hand in glove, values by values with the Royal Air Force. But it's not the technology that is used by the Royal Australian Air Force or the RAF. It's the character and noble traditions upon which both of these air forces have been built. Behind the blue uniforms worn by our Air Force stand the values that are enshrined above the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier before you. Under that airman: chivalry, courage, honour, integrity, courtesy, a sense of justice, and most importantly, a readiness to help others, no matter what the cost to yourself. To young Australians in particular, do not think of the Royal Australian Air Force as simply being men and women who fly planes. They are essential, but it's ground crews, engineers, technicians, loadmasters, those who work in administration and logistics, and doctors and nurses. And this woman that's standing to my right is one of them. A decade and a half in the Royal Australian Air Force, and the medals that she wears reflecting that, as a nurse, who survived a helicopter crash in East Timor in 2004 with horrific injuries, and went on throughout her career, amongst other things, to lead the surgical team in Afghanistan, treating Australians at a time when we sustained significant casualties. And as she said to an Anzac Day audience here in concluding of her service, "I have worn their blood, so many of us have worn their blood." To those men and women who wear and who've worn the Royal Australian Air Force, on behalf of all of us who are here and all of our nation, I say thank you. Thank you for what you have done. Thank you for what you continue to do. And as Carolyn Thomas wrote of her dead husband, you live for us, and we know that if necessary, you will die for us. And that is why we will continue to be free. The Royal Air Force gave us, the Canadians and other air forces, our motto by which it lives: per ardua astra, through adversity to the stars.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. it would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Flight Sergeant Cyril Thomas Scott. Born in the Sydney suburb of Botany on the 27th of December 1915, Cyril Scott was born the son of Cyril and Violet Scott. Growing up, young Cyril attended Gardner Road Technical School. He was a keen sportsman, playing Australian rules football, rugby league, soccer, cricket and tennis. Following his schooling, he took up an apprenticeship with Enoch Taylor, eventually becoming employed as a clicker, cutting the uppers for boots and shoes at the Selby Shoe Company in Redfern. On the 1st of June 1940, Scott married Caroline Melling at Malabar. The following year, a son, Robert Thomas Scott, was born to the couple. Scott applied to become an aircrew member in December 1941, joined the Royal Australian Air Force Reserve in February 1942, and then the Citizen Air Force in July. He formally enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force in October. After initial training school at Bradfield Park, he began training as a wireless operator and air gunner. He attended bombing and gunnery school at Port Pirie and wireless and air gunner school at Parkes, earning his wireless and air gunner's badges in May and June 1943. On the 4th of August 1943, Scott left Australia, his wife and 2-year-old son, and embarked for overseas service. As part of the Empire Air Training Scheme, he was one of almost 27,500 Royal Air Force and Australian Air Force pilots, navigators, wireless operators, gunners and engineers who throughout the course of the war joined the Royal Air Force squadrons or Australian squadrons based in Britain. In the United Kingdom, Scott served in training units until July 1944, when he was posted to No. 9 Squadron, Royal Air Force, as part of the RAF's Bomber Command. No. 9 Squadron was equipped with the 4-engined Avro Lancaster heavy bomber. The following month, on the 13th of August, Scott was the wireless operator and air gunner in a Lancaster on a daylight mission to bomb U-boat pens and shipping in the harbour at Brest on the western coast of France. While the aircraft was over the target, it was hit by flak and its wingtip was shot off. As other members of the squadron looked on, it turned and dived straight into the ground. No survivors could be seen emerging from the wreckage, which sank under 2 meters of water near the beach at Plougastel. The bodies of Scott's crewmates washed ashore and were buried at Plougastel-Dalois communal cemetery near Brest, but no trace of Cyril Scott could be found. He was initially posted as missing, and with no further information regarding his whereabouts, he was officially presumed dead in 1945. 4 years later, a violent storm moved the wreckage of the aircraft, and Scott's remains were dislodged from the wreck. After being recovered and identified, they were buried alongside those of his crewmates. Cyril Scott was 28 years old. He had been with his squadron for just 1 month when he was killed, leaving behind a grieving wife and infant son. The epitaph chosen by his family for his gravestone is simple. He lived for us, he died for us. Cyril Scott's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, amongst almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Flight Sergeant Cyril Thomas Scott, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them. Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. That concludes this evening's last post ceremony. The Spitfire that you have just witnessed was arranged by the British High Commission and the Temora Aviation Museum. We are delighted to inform you that the Spitfire will be performing a display over Lake Burley Griffin shortly after today's ceremony. The display will be best viewed from the memorial's forecourt. Please follow the direction of the memorial staff and make your way outside to watch the display. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, we thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.